good vibrations.
You've been pretty busy this year. You've put together a monumental resource of alternative information about this whole scamdemic at the website cvpandemicinvestigation.com. And the tagline for that is evidence of fraud, medical malpractice, acts of domestic terrorism and breaches of human rights, which sounds about right. But you've really put the work in there and brought together a whole load of disparate sources into a one-stop shop, which makes it very convenient for people to get everything they need access to all in one place. That must have taken months and months to assemble, by the looks of it.
Yeah, I mean, I've said to other people, when it all was kicking off back in sort of late Feb, early March, I didn't want to be involved with it. I just thought, people are getting they're overreacting to this. It's not going to be anything. They do it. There's something like this comes up every year in small ways, and I hoped it was all going to go away, and it didn't. And then the lockdown started. But what happened was I was getting a lot of people sending me information because a lot of the stuff I posted at Check the Evidence, and even more so with the CV Pandemic Investigation website, it's kind of crowdsourced. I've got people sending me links and videos and stuff, documents from a whole sort of background and spectrum of people. There's a couple. I think there's one lady who's been quite anonymous, but she's an immunologist. She's been sending me quite a few bits of stuff, some good stuff, scientific stuff, and and then there was just sort of fairly lay people that I've been in touch with on and off over the years through the Check the Evidence website. They sent me accounts of what's happened in their neighbourhood or what's happened at their school and stuff like this. So I've been putting all that onto the website pretty much every day since I think it was probably the end of March or the early April I set up the actual website, because if people go to Check the Evidence, they'll find quite a mixture of stuff, some of the stuff you've covered with your other guests on your podcast, those sorts of topics. And of course, maybe as you think yourself, some of it's pretty far out. So for Joe in the street who's never looked at any of the conspiracy stuff, they might have heard of David Icke, but they've never looked at something like, say, free energy or anything like that. I think some of the Check the Evidence topics they might find a bit either distracting or, no, this is too much David Icke, I don't really want to look at this. So I decided to split it all off into a new website, and I've set things up such that what I do is I just send out an email with two different email addresses, and one of the email addresses is linked onto Check the Evidence, and so whatever gets sent to that email address gets posted on Check the Evidence, and then the other one is CV Pandemic Investigation. It's the same setup I've got on both websites, so I can mirror stuff on both just by using one email, so that saves a lot of time, obviously, and you can just concentrate on actually copying and pasting together an email, basically, and that then goes out to Check the Evidence, it goes to CV Pandemic, it goes to an email list. Anybody that's signed up on the website will get copies, and then it also goes out onto Twitter and on Facebook all in one go, because that's how I've set it up. So that saves quite a bit of time, to get that information to various audiences,
Well, cvpandemicinvestigation.com, there it all is at that site, a very useful place for people to point regular members of society who might be swallowing the official BBC version of things to get an alternative take on things all in one place. Do you ever wish that you didn't have to do this with your life and you didn't feel that responsibility to have to put your time and energy into all this stuff and instead use it for things that you'd much prefer to be doing?
Definitely, but kind of ironically for me, I won't go into details, but a domestic situation has arisen, which has, kind of forced me into lockdown anyway, almost. It's not quite like that, of course, because obviously we met in Birmingham and stuff like that, but it's kind of weird personally. My personal circumstances are almost sort of tied in with what's happened with this COVID thing. So that means that I've been able to spend my time at home usefully, or I hope usefully, and according to what other people tell me, it's been useful to them. Putting all this information together. So it's kind of weird, but yes, we did, for example, have a break booked in April. We were going to go up to the Lake District, not even abroad, for heaven's sake, and we jacked that in. I think there is, because of the work of people like yourself, and obviously Piers Corbyn's been hard at it, and Kevin P. Corbett, they've been out on the streets and stuff, and there's several other people, the Ike sons, they've been out on the streets as well, of course, and of course David Icke himself. So, of course, I think with David himself, though, it's a bit of a double-edged sword with what's him being attached to this. But ways that things are falling apart, I think the numbers of people that are listening to alternative arguments and alternative evidence is growing. And I certainly, if I was to go back through my emails since March and April, I've had a lot more people writing to me saying, I'm glad that you've had this website, because that's I found certain information on there, and this is what's happened to me. So I think there are more and more people who have got out of the narrative, and I've had a couple of people around. I had a gardener around yesterday, and we had a gardener around a couple of weeks ago, a different gardener, and they both they said things like, well, I've stopped watching the BBC now, and I've stopped watching the mainstream. And in fact, I don't know how much you followed of the Anna Brees videos and whatnot, but she interviewed Sue Cook, the legendary 1980s journalist.
Yeah.
And she even said that she'd now stopped listening to the BBC Today programme. Right. And I mean, that is a pretty big, whatever you might think of Anna Brees and some of the things, she's posted, I think overall, I think she has done a good service in that my take on Anna is that she can't quite believe how bad the mainstream is. I think she's kind of like been a bit in denial over that over the last few months, and she's slowly kind of getting there, I think, with the help of people like Sue Cook, who've just said, well, this is just completely wrong. But my feeling with Anna is that she's really struggled with it to actually realise how much they've lied and what sort of agenda they are supporting behind the scenes, and how long this has been going on. And I think that's made her a little bit resistant to, for example, talking about some of the bigger picture, like, the World Economic Forum and all that stuff. Although, she has posted videos just from the general public that have talked about that very thing, and she's had some very good speakers on there who've gone through all of that. So I think people like Sue Cook, Anna Brees, and even Richard Madeley, for example, they started to express scepticism. Now, of course, Richard Madeley is still, I think when I heard him speaking on talk radio, he was still saying, oh yes, well, we needed the initial lockdown and stuff like that. And there's a few of them are actually still thinking along those lines, but at least, they're not saying, oh yeah, well, I just believe the BBC and, and this expert's right, and this Dr. Hilary Jones, whatever his name is, yeah, he's totally legit. At least they're not saying that. They're now questioning what is actually going on. Yeah, I agree, and I've been following some of those names. So I mean, I for example, you mentioned Katie Hopkins, but I had no clue who she was. I've heard her name in connection to speaking out against the scam, but before that, I have to be honest, I didn't know who she was.
Well, Katie Hopkins is known for being obnoxious and controversial, and she'll just deliberately take the opposite view to the prevailing one on any subject just to get herself heard. But in this instance, if she's got an audience and if she's getting through to people, and if she is challenging the official narrative, which is full of lies and deceptions, then fair play to her. At least she's getting the right message out there, whatever the motives. I mean, we'll take anything we can get on that front at the moment, if it's getting through to regular, normal people, right?
I tend to agree with that, and I think The other thing is things like this, which I think was probably worth talking about, is this Great Barrington Declaration, because you can argue that of course is another way that the scam is falling apart.
Sure.
But I don't know what your thoughts on that are, and whether you've looked at it in depth. And when that came out, I thought, oh, good kind of thing, I signed it. But then a couple of days ago, somebody sent me a very good article, and it's actually very long, and I'm only about 2/3 of the way through it. And I think when I looked at it, I had a sense, and mainly from listening to Professor Gupta, so I think she was on that, you've probably seen that YouTube channel, Unheard, I think it is, where they've called it Lockdown TV, and the chap there, I forget his name, and he interviewed Professor Gupta, I think, 2 or 3 months back, quite a while back, and she was speaking about what happened in Sweden, I think, and that the herd immunity was the way to go, kind of thing, and all of that. But and of course, I think all three of them on that Great Barrington Declaration, while they're sort of pretty much going along with the herd immunity concept, which many people, when they look into this, might end up not agreeing with, because of this, as you've said yourself many times. The whole idea of viral infection comes under scrutiny when you start digging into this, and what a virus actually is. And I've gone down that rabbit hole a bit more now, and as you say yourself, whether the virus is real, whether it's what they claim it is, and all of that, that's almost a secondary issue.
Yeah.
Because of what's actually been going on for years, and how what's been going on for years actually dictates what's happening now, rather than whether the virus is real, whether it's not real, whether it came out of a bat or a wet market or whatever.
Yeah.
That's just an enabler.
Well, the problem I have with the Great Barrington Declaration is that it is advocating vaccines. In the language there, they're talking about vaccines as if it's a good thing, and they're promoting the value of them. So that's a bit of a red flag for me.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when I saw this, I didn't check for that properly, and I wish I had now. In one sense, it's a minor thing. I don't mind that signing it. And I suppose me saying this now, I'm hoping that will make other people think about this, and think about, again, you've talked about this on your podcast many times. I know, because I've listened to a few of your podcasts, controlled opposition. And this is another thing which, when you get into all of this, you've got to be aware of the perception management that goes on. And you may be familiar with this guy, Richard Hoagland, who did a lot of research into the stuff, the NASA stuff.
The NASA guy, yeah.
Right, yeah, he used to be he covered the Mars missions in the 60s with Walter Cronkite. He says he was some consultant to NASA, but he tends to overinflate himself quite a lot. But anyway, he had this good expression. He said the lie is different at every level. And I think that's in other words, the Great Barrington Declaration, as it were, if we take that as an example, it's being a bit more truthful in relation to, we don't need these lockdowns, they don't do anything, the measures against human rights. I think it says some of that, but then, like you said a minute ago, it still promotes the lie of vaccinations, So this is where, when you get into it, I mean, you and I, we've been researching this stuff for years in different areas, but it's got similar sorts of things which come out, and we know that you've got to put the hours in. You really have got to put the hours in. So you've got to have patience, you've got to have dedication. You've at least got to have a good memory, fairly good memory anyway, to hold information, from prior research, so that you can connect it with new research and build the picture. And so those skills, we can ask ourselves, and this is not meant to be a criticism of anybody or anything in particular, but how many in the general population are capable of that sort of, following those methods and doing that, A, having the time, B, having the memory, C, having the critical thinking skills to actually process this information. So that's an issue. I think that we have to think about. So I think there is controlled opposition around, and I think probably this Great Barrington one, particularly as it got mentioned by Matt Hancock in Parliament a few days ago, and he was trying to ridicule it. I don't think, for example, Dr. Andrew Kaufman and his discussion of how viruses might be exosomes, and I don't think he even says that that's proved. He just says that, that's what it looks like to him, and I have a lot of sympathy with that conclusion. And he wouldn't get mentioned in Parliament. He wouldn't they wouldn't discuss what exosomes were in Parliament, etc. Because that would call into question so many other things.
And you could be damn sure that something they wouldn't mention in Parliament is the private criminal prosecutions bill that's being brought under common law by Michael O'Byrne against all 647 British MPs, and which is evidently going very well.
I did actually, Mark. I listened to that yesterday or the day before, and I thought it was excellent, and it was very important that people should hear what Michael had to say. And I was also very interested in, he made a comment, didn't he, people should go back and listen to it, about how he'd been bumped off, from being a speaker on various events by a person who everyone would know, and I think I knew who he meant, but I'm not going to say it either. And that's what I've experienced as well, not with this research, but with the sort of 9/11 research I've done. I actually got bumped off a conference in Greece because of the 9/11 stuff. That was 2 or 3 years ago. So I know exactly what he means, Sure. And again, we're back to the controlled opposition scenario. So I thought it was excellent, the way that he presented the information and how he explained everything. Because there were a few things that I'd heard about, but I think the way he explained it with the common law aspects and stuff and what he'd done, and I didn't really think of it in the context he put it in as well, the Thatcher government and the miners' strike and all of that. I hadn't really thought of all of that. Yeah. And why this is kind of like a logical extension of what Thatcher was doing in the 80s, breaking down the power structures and really rebuilding them in a new form and forcing people to conform with a new situation. Yeah. That was part of the mechanics of both the Thatcher era and of course the Blair era. Well, I think in the Blair era it was a bit more subtle what was going on. Obviously, we saw people being beaten up in the miners' strike and being, riot police and everything. So yeah, that was really good what he put out there.
Well, it's pretty much the best hope we've got at the moment in terms of holding these treasonous MPs to account for all the harm, damage and loss they've caused, personally to account, them as individuals. I mean, can you imagine Boris Johnson and Matt Hancock, Chris Whitty, Dominic Cummings, Grant Shapps, Dominic Raab, all of them going to jail for what they've done? Can you imagine how amazing and monumental that would be?
It would be, it's hard to think of, isn't it? But, and I think, following on from that, one of the things I did, I don't think I spoke to you about this, but you might have seen it on the website, was the actual website CV Pandemic Investigation. The tagline is research, understand, communicate. That was my theme, that I wanted people to research, to understand the information, take ownership of it, of whatever parts they feel comfortable knowing, and understanding, and then communicate that to other people. So I kind of just, when I did the website, I plucked that out of thin air actually, and it seemed to encapsulate my sort of mentality of how I approached both this and a lot of the other topics that you talked about on your podcast. And then what I did was I put this report on there, which I called Challenging the Narrative. That was the first report I did. So if people want to get a fairly good sort of potted history of where I think this came from, or parts of it in recent history, and where it's, and I actually got in this first report, which is called Challenging the Narrative, I've got like past, present and future kind of thing of what I think this is all about. And then I talk about the elements within each of those which, show what the past is like with the swine flu pandemic. And of course it goes in 2009, of course it goes much further back in history than that. And then the present with all the lockdown laws and stuff, and then the future, which is like, the Bill Gates stuff and, the ID 2020 and the vaccinations and stuff. And in fact, there was somebody sent me an interesting link, and it was Boris Johnson's speech. You may be aware of this already, Mark, but Boris Johnson's speech at the UN in September 2019.
Yeah.
He specifically mentioned anti-vaxxers as being anti-science, which I thought was very interesting. That he would be mentioning that, and of course this UN speech is obviously a big thing for any leader, isn't it? So it's interesting that he got that in the speech, and then all this, and that was just a few weeks before the bloody Event 201 thing was done,
Indeed, which was a year ago today, incidentally.
Yes, it was, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So there you go. So I put all that in the first report, right? But then kind of going back to what we were talking about with Michael Obanisia, I had kind of had similar thinking to him, maybe slightly after him, I don't know when, and in fact what kicked me off on this was I did a Freedom of Information request to Public Health England, and that itself was inspired by another one that was done by a lady called Christine Massey in Canada, and she'd written to the Canadian Health Authority, I can't remember the name of it, and she said, basically, where's the evidence that this virus has been isolated from a corpse, or from human tissue? And she phrased this in a particular way, using scientific language, basically. And they came back and said, well, we don't have any evidence of this virus being isolated. So I sent the same thing. In fact, I just copied her entire thing and just changed Canadian Health to Public Health England, and everything else was exactly the same. And I got exactly the same response back. It took a while. It took about 5 weeks, I think, that Public Health England have no evidence that they've ever isolated this virus. And, of course, this was a theme that Piers Corbyn used in his letter with Kevin Corbett, wasn't it?
I mean, just from what you've said there is no evidence to prove that COVID-19 exists. It's not been isolated. It's not been shown to exist in the way we're told that it does. So without that proof, there is no justification for anything that's been introduced in its wake in any kind of logical, sane and just society. The realisation that it's not been proven to exist would overturn all the measures that have been introduced and justified by this apparent virus. So everything that's been done to us, all these changes in society would have to be immediately rolled back, because we're told the only reason they've been put into place is to keep us safe from this virus. Without the virus, there's no justification for any of it. But of course, we live in anything but a logical, sane and just society, as we can see.
This is it, and this leads you into the whole insanity of it. And so when I got that back, I thought, right, now surely we must have, and this goes back to what Michael was doing, the word that came to my mind was fraud, which is what he's used in his action, isn't it?
Yep.
At least part of it. And so what I then did was, that kicked me off. So I said, right, well, let's look at the other laws. And I can't remember whether it was Piers Corbyn who said something or somebody else. But I went off and I looked at some of the other laws, because in fact, no, what it was UK Column. UK Column have been obviously very good in featuring some of the government, documents and stuff. And they've talked about some of the SAGE minutes and stuff like that. And they're quite revealing if you go and look at the SAGE documents, and Simon Dolan's action, revealed that some of the SAGE documents, they tried to keep them secret, but then Dolan's case forced them to release some of them. But I think some of them were there all the time, actually. And there's one that was revealed by UK Column. You may have well covered this before on your podcast, but about the SAGE documents, which is called options for increasing adherence to social distancing measures.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen that document.
Mind control by any other name.
Exactly. And so I looked at that, and I think it was said on UK Column. I don't think it was sort of my particular take on it. What that was that fitted with the description of domestic terrorism. If you go look at the Terrorism Act, I think the words are in it. Something that will affect public health. And what's this done? What's this fraud done? It's affected public health.
Well, how many bloody people have committed suicide for a start, and will
exactly.
continue to do so?
And they're actually openly saying in that document they need to create fear. They're going to use emotive language and all of that.
Yeah.
So So that, to me, is clearly an admission that they're committing acts of terrorism. And again, I think that was just from UK Column that they said that. And it kind of went in there, one time and didn't really go anywhere, just stayed in my brain. So I thought, well, I've got that, so I'll put that in the report. And I looked up that document, and I got the reference, and it's still there. It was a few weeks ago. And then we've got and in fact, at the same time, this isn't so well known, but this bit is well known, the bit I'm saying next, but the backstory is less well known. We know that the government put this posting on their website, I think on March the 19th, and Van Morrison put this in his recent song, but he got the date wrong, so I think he said it was the 21st, but I think it was the 19th, but anyway, that's a minor thing. And they said that that COVID-19 was no longer an HCID, it wasn't a high-consequence infectious disease.
And that's still on their website, last time I checked.
Yeah, I think it's still there. But I found out what triggered that posting, and it came from the ACDP, which is the Advisory Committee on Dangerous Pathogens, because they had a meeting on the 13th of March, and the chairman, who's Professor Tom Evans, he sent a letter to Public Health England basically saying that, we all unanimously agreed that COVID-19 isn't an HCID, and I've got a copy of that letter because a researcher called John Asprey sent it to me. So I put that on my website, and I put it in the report as well, a quote from it. So we now know what triggered, that posting, and we got a little bit of an insight into some of the backroom, dealings that were going on. So that really, to me, is them committing fraud again. But they're ignoring their own government panel or think tank or whatever you want to call it to get that thing up and running. Because then, and the other thing I found a few weeks later, and I decided to update the report after the first version I'd issued, was that Matt Hancock said in Parliament, and this is in Hansard, on the 23rd of March, he said that they'd been working on the coronavirus bill for 3 months. And he said that on the 23rd of March, So where does that take you back to?
Well, then you're in December, which is when this thing is supposed to have emerged out of Wuhan, China, and first made itself known. But either way, it is remarkably swift action.
Absolutely. So, that has got to raise serious questions.
Well, there's documents available in the public domain showing that the test kits for this were being prepared back in 2017, and there's other documentation to show that there were measures in place to deal with this so-called pandemic as far back as 2015. So it's been known about and it's been planned for years, clearly.
Some of those things I've been a bit more wary of, because that COVID testing kits, which I think came out of the World Bank or something, didn't it? There was some database of products or something on the World... Was it the World Bank? I forget what it was. Yeah, I saw that as well, and I looked at that, and it did look like they were labelling them as test kits being sold in 2016, 2017 and stuff, COVID-19. And then they did actually change that, and their website got updated. Not long after that got circulated. And I'm wondering if that was a bit of bait and switch, that they baited people with that. Because what it was just an online database. And I think it could have been fairly easy to shove that information in, and stuff.
You have to wonder why they've not removed that reference from the official government website yet. So you can point anyone to it and they can see with their own eyes that it's been downgraded from a highly contagious infectious disease, in the government's own words. So it's almost as if they want people to know about this, and there are so many elements of what's been done to us which suggest that they actually want to rub the noses of certain factions of the population right in it. And what it amounts to is psychological torture, which has no doubt been perfected by an organisation like the Tavistock Institute or the Behavioural Insights team that specialise in this kind of thing. They know there are factions of society, such as us, who can see that this whole thing is a scam. We've known it from day one, but we can't communicate that to the vast number of people who are still believing the official line and everything their TV tells them, and it's driving us absolutely insane. That would be part of the plan, to just wind us up like that and mock us like that.
I tend to agree, Mark, and there's a line of thinking which says that some of these leaders may be under pressure or under threats, behind the scenes, so they feel they've got to make it do things that make it so obvious.
And so there's no shortage of ways when you factor in the documentation that's available, all the references to these pandemics and these viruses that have been in movies and TV shows over the years, and just how blatant and ridiculous and infantile everything's being made now. Anyone with half a brain cell, 2 eyes to see, and the capacity for critical thought can see that this whole thing is a scam. It's a farce. It's a debacle. We've been given enough information for anyone with the will to look at it to see it for what it is. They, in their sick, diseased way, have told us, and there's no excuse for not knowing what's really going on here.
Absolutely, and of course it gets down to this idea of giving consent. If they give you information subconsciously or subliminally, and you don't notice this, then you're implicitly giving your consent to all these evil deeds that they are doing.
Yeah.
And I think that's apparently the way the occult system works.
It's just a little reminder that the architects of this narrative are dark occultists. They are Satanists, and that drives their actions.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the dark realizations that people, are they going to be able to handle that? Are they going to be able to handle this? It starts to get kind of a bit biblical, doesn't it? And of course, many people are now either atheistic or agnostic or a-religious. So when they start to hear talk of Satanism and Luciferianism, they think, it's all rubbish, that's all like superstitious nonsense from, 2 millennia ago, and all that. But so I think it can be hard for people to get into that. But I want to take a couple of steps back, because going back to that report, what I tried to do was, for example, I looked at the mask issue as well, in terms of not so much the occult side of it, which I agree with comments that have been made about that. And I know you were up in Leeds the weekend, and you mentioned that when you were speaking in Leeds, and I agree with that. But just looking at the science of that, and we can see how it's all been, and this goes back to what you again were saying a couple of minutes ago, up until late March, early April, and I've got the videos of the government ministers saying this. I played an audio clip of all these ministers, including Chris Whitty, saying that the masks don't help, and Matt Hancock even said it. And so then it just completely went to 180, didn't it? And again, that I think is the psychological torture, the contradiction, and this reprogramming and trauma-based mind control. Call it what you will. It's like were doing to bloody Winston Smith in Room 101, isn't it? It's a less extreme form of that, but I think it's the same thing.
Well.
Yeah, and so I put all of that in the report, but just on a practical level, not talking about the occult. The implementation of mask wearing, as far as I understand it, and from what I looked up, that actually breaks the Health and Social Care Act from 2012, because no impact assessment was done. So whoever has put that out there has broken the law on that act as well. So we've basically got fraud, domestic terrorism, and we've got the breaking of the Health and Social Care Act. Whoever's gone along with these guidelines without doing an impact assessment has broken that act. It's broken that law. And then on top of that, of course, we've got this whole idea of the actual treatment of the disease. Because, of course, people have died of something. We can argue about whether it was this virus or a flu virus, or, the death certificates have been falsified and stuff like that. But people have died. We're not denying that. And some people, even when we start to question this, you're saying, so you're a granny killer and all that. You're denying that people have died. No, not at all. We're not denying that at all. But what I'm saying, and what I argue in the report, is that more people have died than needed to die, because they haven't been given treatments like hydroxychloroquine, which hasn't been used in the UK as far as I know, not in any general sense, but it has been used in some places in the US, and it's been used, I think it was used in China actually back in February when this was all kicking off, to some people that had fallen ill there. And that treatment has been deprived. People have been deprived of having that cheap. It's a non-patented treatment. It's been around for 70 years, and there's been lots of studies done with it now. Dr. Simone Gold, she put out studies on that, and so that's the lack of that treatment. The fact that it's not being used by doctors and not being allowed to be prescribed, etc., that is medical malpractice.
Yeah.
The putting of elderly patients into care homes, chucking them out of hospitals, that is medical malpractice, right? So that is another crime, and that's another crime that's being committed.
Are you disappointed at how long it's taken to get to this stage? I mean, we're about 8 months into this shit show now, and it's time where our lives have been ruined that we're never going to get back. And it's only now that many medical whistleblowers are coming forward, lawyers are starting to put together cases, the protest events are really picking up steam. I mean, I went to a Hyde Park demo back in June in the first lockdown, and the turnout was pathetic. There were maybe 50, 60 people there. That's obviously changed now, and tens of thousands are turning out to these rallies, but it's taken long enough. Do you get the impression that many actually bought the lies in the early months of this? And it's only now that it's been dragged out for so long, and it's getting more farcical and absurd by the day, that people are finally twigging that this is about so much more than a virus. At last, they're getting it.
Very much so, and I think that that's at a number of levels, really. Because people have had their lives so badly affected, and they've just rolled over and accepted it. And, it does make me despair. I mean, I had to go to the hospital with my wife on Friday, and it wasn't an emergency or anything, just for a regular appointment. And we were the only two people in there not wearing masks in the whole place, just about. There was one other person who wasn't wearing one. And we had this appointment, and we were the only ones not wearing masks, including the health people that were there. I just, you just despair. These are supposed to be health professionals. They're supposed to know this stuff. I'm just some guy, with a website, as I call myself. And so I despair at that, and I am disappointed that, for example, the local GP, and it's the same for everyone. They say you must wear a mask when you go in. It's just, and they've pulled all the seats out. I mean, why aren't people thinking about what they're doing more? And there's still a high proportion of people wearing masks. And as you probably agree, that we can have these conversations and do these podcasts, but there is a big element of that where it just becomes an echo chamber. And I think, to me, if we are going to change things, if things are going to change, the mainstream media has got to be changed. In other words, I think the only thing, how this happens, or if it happens, or when it happens, I don't know, but the only thing that is going to reverse the situation quickly is we need the mainstream media to be telling the truth that we are putting out here, with the same frequency as they've been putting out the lies, and that needs to go on for probably at least a minimum of 2 weeks. The 24/7 coverage that they've done essentially needs to be reversed, if I could put it that way. I think that really is the only way that we're going to get large numbers of people really understanding what's going on. And I can't, at the moment, without violence, and I'm not advocating violence, of course, I can't see how that's going to happen.
The mainstream media telling the truth. Oh, a pink unicorn just flew past my window there. There must be those that work in government, the police, the mainstream media, the health service, who can see for themselves that this is a big hoax, but they're going along with it for the sake of their salary and career. And yet they're having their rights and freedoms taken away along with everyone else's. They're having their freedom of movement and freedom of choice affected. They can't do the things that they might want to do. And it's affecting their children as well. I mean, surely to God, there must be some of them that can see that the only way for this all to stop is for them to refuse to cooperate with the lies and the deceptions and to be a part of it anymore, and to speak out about what's going on, stand in unity with many, many others. I mean, loads of people have lost their jobs and livelihoods here, so they'd hardly be alone in quitting their posts for the sake of getting the truth out.
This is it, and this is the big frustration. And I think you talked before, I know, and I feel the same way about this. One day you can wake up and feel quite optimistic about things, and the next day, you can feel just mortified and quite depressed.
Sure.
And I've had exactly those feelings as well. And but it is, I'm thinking, why can't people see this now? And I'm not just meaning regular Joe, in the supermarket, but as we said, the health professionals, they must surely be able to see this, And maybe there are some people in the power structures that, are beginning to start to think for themselves a bit more. But we're still not reaching this kind of critical turning point that we need to turn things back, because, the people that have the power that are running this narrative seem to be able to still control the vast majority of people, and we're still in a small minority, And I also hope, for example, I followed that. I listened to that broadcast you did, I think, with Charlie Freak about the QAnon thing, and I've posted an article about that. And I do share some optimism with people about the QAnon narrative and what's been going on there. And I do hope that some of these things that have been coming out really are going to mean that, come 12 months, 24 months time, we're going to have a totally different and positive situation, and not, a sort of bloody FEMA camp type scenario and internment camps, which again has reared its head in the last few days in Canada. I don't know if you've seen those posts about that in the last couple of days. And so I hope, that there are enough people there that are now looking towards a positive outcome, and I'm hoping that Trump is, for example, Trump's just criticised Fauci and said he was an idiot. That came out, I think, in the last 24 or 48 hours on a leaked press conference call. So I'm encouraged by developments like that.
He was at a political rally in Prescott, Arizona recently, and he called CNN out as "you dumb bastards" for continuing to push the pandemic propaganda. I mean, when have you ever heard a president or any kind of world leader speak like that before? Whatever you think of him, he's a breath of fresh air in that regard. In his direct talk, it's incredible.
I heard read some comment. I haven't heard the order, but yeah, exactly. There's some pretty extraordinary things like that, and just the whole thing with Hillary and Biden and what they've been proposing, the sort of language they've been using, and that's supposed to be the Democratic Party, And then you've got I clicked on something this morning with Jim Carrey, I never know how to pronounce his name. Yeah. And he was saying, he said you shouldn't bother with this Trump guy, vote for Biden. I forget the exact comments. And I'm thinking, what? Why would Jim Carrey post that? He must be...
Well, because his handler told him to. That's the only reason.
This is it. And you can't... How can you see it any other way? When Clinton actually said a couple of weeks ago that Biden should never concede, what does that mean?
Well, I think we can all reflect on how much worse things would be for everyone if Hillary Clinton had got in 2016 instead of Trump. But I don't see how the likes of Johnson, Hancock, Whitty, Valance and all this lot can emerge from all this unscathed, because the truth is going to come out. The lies are not sustainable long term. At the very least, their careers and public reputations will be ruined, and that's the mildest of all the potential results. They are going to be held to account for this when it becomes clear to the masses that they've been lied to. This has all been a big con. Heads are going to have to roll, and it's these people's heads that people are going to want to see. It can't end well for any of these.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, my sort of wider or longer term fears revolve around who's really in charge behind the scenes, and we've heard, again, certain things come out of the QAnon narrative, but I often think about, I've heard various statements over the years from more military people, and like, I hate to quote Sylvester Stallone, but I remember watching an interview with Sylvester Stallone. This was like years and years ago, and because he was interviewed about the Rocky films and about something to do with them being all about aggression, and one-to-one fights, in the boxing world and all of that. And he made some comment that, he says, well, when you get down to it, it's about one person fighting another, and it's about who can hit the hardest punch, so to speak. I can't remember the exact quote. But, I'm wondering, is it going to come down to that? Is it going to come down to who's got the most military power, and that might not just mean bloody tanks and warplanes and ships and nukes and all of that. We're obviously talking about psychological weapons as well, and psychological torture. How do we, in other words, how do we kind of think about battles that might ensue using those weapons, and even chemical weapons or something like that? Are we going to see that? In other words, the people that are supposedly working for the good guys, behind the Q people, QAnon person, or whoever he is, what sort of military might and what sort of military technology have they got at their disposal if they want to help us? And when we think of all these globalists with all their money and power and so forth, what sort of technology have they got at their disposal? What would unfold? What would trigger a conflict? I think about those things sometimes as well, and how that would all unfold.
Well, it really is a case of taking one day at a time, because things are changing literally by the day now. One thing I have noticed is there's been a lot of threats made. There's been a lot of horror stories about things that are planned to be brought in, and a lot of truthers have been losing their minds about all this stuff. But much of it has not come to manifest, and we've not seen it actually be brought in. So it seems a lot of it is being used, again, as psychological manipulation and threats just hanging over our heads. But it doesn't necessarily follow that these are going to become reality, particularly if enough of us stand up and see this tyranny off and put the evil down. I do feel that the narrative is going to change quite majorly after the American elections. Not long to wait now. What things are going to look like on the other side of that, I have no idea, but they are changing very quickly, and we could be in a very different place within a week or two.
Yeah, I have to agree, Mark, and I've always tried to ignore elections for many years. In fact, I've never voted. I think in 10 years, I think probably 10 years ago was the last time I voted, and I think that's when I went in to spoil my ballot paper, write something on it. I think was what I did last time I voted in any UK election. And but with this, of course, this upcoming one, well, it's going to be a whole different ball game, isn't it? And looking at the more positive side, and again looking at the QAnon narrative, I think it is quite weird how we think, that Robert F. Kennedy has been pretty much one of the key figures, for example, in this, the situation in Berlin where they had the big rally, and he's joined the group there. I really got a warm glow when I saw him with Dr. Schoening and the other doctors. It was probably about a couple of months back now since he did that, and he did that speech, to that group. And it's really interesting, isn't it, that he actually is the nephew of John F. Kennedy, and how he found himself in that situation at this time. You couldn't make it up, could you?
It does seem that people are finally starting to twig that tests equal increased case numbers, and increased case numbers equal further restrictions on rights and freedoms and more lockdowns. So the more people go to get tests, the more freedoms we get taken away. And it's not just the freedoms of those people that go for the tests, but it's those of everyone else as well, including those of us that know it's bullshit and don't consent to having our basic rights and freedoms taken away as well. This is not any kind of pandemic, it's a case-demic, and it only continues being a case-demic because people keep going to get tested. Stop getting tested.
I hope that people are thinking, well, what benefit is there to getting tested unless they've got one of those letters through the door where they're going to get paid 50 or 25 quid per test. Of course, you've probably heard about those letters going out.
Yeah, they're giving vouchers, £25 vouchers if you go and get a test. So that's obviously incentivising some. For fuck's sake.
Exactly. I don't know how widespread that is, but a friend of mine wrote to me and sent me a picture of his torn up letter because he tore it up as soon as he got it through the door, and I said, "Oh, can you send me a picture?" And he did, and so I've torn it up, but he sent me the reassembled pieces.
It's either that or wipe his arse with it. You wouldn't want a picture.
Yeah, he hadn't done that. I can tell you that. So it was, So we have to hope that people are thinking a bit more about, for example, what advantage getting tested would hold. And this, of course, starts to get into people being prevented from working. There was somebody that wrote to me a few weeks ago. I think they were doing it. I think they were like a cleaner in a hospital or something, and they were told that, or a care home. They were told they had to get tested to carry on working. And I think in the end they did some type of home test or something. They did it voluntarily themselves. They didn't get forced into it at their workplace, but I think it came back negative, and they were okay, you know. But it's just crazy what people are being forced into, and you know, how do we escape from it? And
well, it's just madness the way people will respond to the incentivization. You know, here's a £25 voucher, and now stay at home for 2 weeks. You can't go out to work. You can't see your family. What kind of incentive is that really? Who's dumb enough to be motivated by that? And people should ask themselves why there's the need for this kind of incentivization anyway. If the virus is real and it's everything we're told it is, then the figures will stand up to scrutiny and everything can be seen to be what it is. And you wouldn't need to bribe people into going to tests to be able to push up the numbers. It's the same thing as the stories we got about the doctors in America that were being financially incentivized with $13,000 every time they put someone down as a COVID-19 death, no matter what they'd actually died of. And then they were reportedly getting payments of $39,000 every time they put someone on a ventilator. And then we've got news of the incoming vaccine, which is going to be available free to everyone. When have you ever known corporations give away anything for free, unless there's some nefarious aspect to it? So they're all questions that people ought to bear in mind. Why is all this incentivization necessary if we're being told the truth?
Exactly. You know, there should be no need. In fact, there should be no need for a test, should there? Is that, I think, you know, you've reposted that same cartoon fairly recently, where, you know, you imagine a virus so deadly you need a test to see if you've got it.
Exactly.
You know, and there's so many blindingly obvious things, but yet people are. You know, in fact, there was an event. There was a walk from Derby to Nottingham last weekend, and they actually came right through the town where I live. And unfortunately, I couldn't join them because I had to go to the hospital again. But you know, it was a shame. But somebody posted pictures of them on Facebook, you know, and I was reading some of the comments. I didn't bother commenting in the end, but they're saying, oh, you know, these people, you know, they're so selfish, and they don't worry about the 1%, blah blah blah, you know. And I'm thinking again, you just don't know, do you? You haven't done any research, haven't done any thinking about this. You know, you haven't looked at all the contradictions. And then, fortunately, there were a couple of people who were saying, well, they've got a perfect right to protest. You know, you don't have to go near them. You don't have to be involved with them. All they're doing is stating their, you know, their opinion, which is a word I don't like in this context, because it's not an opinion. It's actually facts and knowledge. It's not opinion. Right. So maybe there is a little bit of hope that you know, people are thinking a bit more just in the regular public that haven't really done the research that you and I have done.
Can you imagine how all the virtue signalling mask zealots are going to feel when all this gets revealed for the scam that it's been, and they realise they wasted however many months of their lives living in fear and dread, putting on a mask, jumping out of the way of people walking towards them on the pavement, not seeing members of their own family, not going to work, watching businesses they've created crumble and fail, losing their livelihoods, all for absolutely nothing, all because of lies. Can you imagine how dumbfounded and rendered absolutely speechless they're going to be when that reality dawns?
I agree with you, Martin. I thought about that as well, and I think, again, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because if people actually do open up and accept that that is indeed, as you described there, what the truth is and what's actually happened, what effect is that going to have on their personality? And I think, and their mood. And I think this is all part of the tally-stop planning, or whoever's planned it, whatever you want to call it, because we know how politicians behave. They will never admit that they were wrong. They will never say, oh, I've been so stupid to do this or believe this or whatever. They will always try and either blame somebody else, or they'll just try and skip over the question or whatever it is. And I think regular people tend to behave like that as well. And that so the bigger the lie, you know, the more that they've been duped by it, I think the harder it's going to be for them to say, I really shouldn't have done that. I really shouldn't have gone down that route. That was a mistake. I shouldn't have been so trusting, or I shouldn't have been so gullible, or whatever word you try to use. I think that's going to be really tough for people to come to terms with that, just for exactly the reasons you stated, and of course many others. So is that going to force a mass awakening? Is that going to force a kind of a global kind of transformation of the way that people view authorities? I hope so. But is that going to lead to these authority structures collapsing? And if they do, what's going to replace them? What is going to come afterwards? And again, I think, like I said earlier, we've just got to take one day at a time. But those questions, I think it's important to consider, at least in your mind, so that you can start to think of what might come after, and start to maybe even plan for something else. Are we all going to end up living in small communities, off grid and things like that? If we're going to survive, are we going to have a sort of societal divide where we have a vast majority of people that are all been vaccinated and more zombified? I'm shocked at the level of zombification now, let alone with any biological biosecurity methods that are used to follow this up, that they're threatening and trying to implement in various places. So is that going to lead us to all being living in separate communities, that are fenced off from one another, and with gated communities, and somebody with a sentry saying you can't come in here because you're zombified and we're not? Is that going to happen? Again, don't know, but I'm thinking of those sorts of things now to try and kind of get my head around what might happen.
Well, let me ask you, what would be the best case scenario from all of this for you? If you could have any kind of outcome, what would that look like for you?
What I'd most like to see is that a lot of, this is where I kind of have vested interest in actually spending a lot of time trying to reveal the truth to people. I'd like to see all the other truths come out. For example, about free energy and about the climate change scam, for example, and weather modification technology that's been in use. And that was used on 9/11. I'd like to see all of that come out, and that those people that are responsible for that being exposed, so that they can no longer do those things in secret anymore, and that we would then have a totally new set of possibilities on the table for how the world is. That we can have free energy, and we can use it responsibly, and we can have free health, because this is one of the other phrases, isn't it? Health freedom. And we're having the opposite of health freedom now. We're having health tyranny. That's what all this is about. So I'd like all the naturopathic doctors to have their own, could be able to practice uninhibited and bring all these treatments in, like, all the cancer cures that have been suppressed, and all the other things. But but also coupled with all of that if that did all come out, we'd also need the realization that that's going to create a new set of problems, because there is a lot of stuff out there which is really, it's really pivotal, it's really significant, like free energy, as I said. How are people are they going to be able to control that? How are they going to control themselves with it? If you can have a craft, which can get to Australia in 5 minutes because it runs on free energy, how is that going to make people behave? Would they use it responsibly? Would they look after people rather than sort of use it to take advantage of people? So you then get down to what would people's spiritual well-being be like? How mature are they spiritually? And again, I'm kind of going off into sort of quite a long distant territory from where we are now, but it's still relevant to how people behave now. How considerate are people for the lives of others? How considerate are they both for individual freedom and their own, keeping their own environment around them clean and tidy and and whatnot, and not polluting things?
Well, there are claims that all of that is indeed coming, so I guess we'll keep an eye on it and we'll know soon enough. There are elements of the mainstream press which appear to be challenging the lockdown measures and criticising government policy now. So the Daily Express recently claimed to have done a readers' poll in which 63% of people supported harsher lockdowns. I don't believe a word of it. That's going to be straight propaganda. But you'll have that, and then you'll get the Daily Mail coming out the same day, talking about the devastating impact that lockdown has already had and all the damage and all the deaths it's caused. Do you feel this is all theatre and optics to give the impression that the mainstream press is being fair and balanced, whereas in fact they're helping to perpetuate the narrative? So it's like a good cop, bad cop thing. You've got the Daily Express playing the bad cop, and the Daily Mail seems like it's the voice of reason playing the good cop. Do you think it's all theatre and games and mind control?
I think there are one or two elements. In fact, and again, we can highlight the talk radio interviews, like some of those are getting sort of more challenging than I expected. What's the name of that lady on there? Teresa? Is it Teresa? No. I should go and look up her name.
I know the one you mean, but I can't think of her name.
Yeah, she's done a couple of good interviews, like with the guy from Pfizer. I keep forgetting his name as well, who came out and sort of criticised all the way that the stats had been manipulated and stuff. So that there are a few. I think certainly Talk Radio has had some very good, sceptical and very well reasoned. And she actually did a good interview with Matt Hancock a week or two ago, and really picked him up about the situation in Bolton. And said that there were only 2 people in the hospital that tested for COVID. And he said, "Oh no, it's much higher than that." He says, "No, that's the official figures." And so I think they've been perhaps closest, because they're sort of not a mainstream source, but they're pretty close to mainstream, and they've been pretty good. As regards the Mail, well, the Mail has always flip-flopped. And for example, the Mail has done lots of stories over the years about, for example, 9/11. They did a big feature on some books that came out questioning the official story. That's going back to 2005. So they've always been to me a bit of a psychological operation, in that they're actually playing to the middle classes, and they're trying to cover the whole broad spectrum of where people are with things like 9/11 truth, with this COVID narrative. So they'll post one story saying, the tests don't work and this has caused all these problems, and then they'll post a story the next day saying, the tests do work and all these cases, are really serious in Wales or wherever it is. So they've definitely been flip-flopping on this issue, I think, the Mail. And we've had a bit of dissent in the Telegraph, but again, as we've talked about with Richard Hall's program, they don't question the underlying narrative. They never really question that. You're much less likely to hear about Bill Gates and the World Economic Forum and things like that in any of the mainstream press. They tend to keep that sort of thing out. So there again, I think, to me, are in a bit of a holding pattern. They're still involved in perception management. In other words, I think they know that stuff is coming out, but they're not going to let out, at least not yet, and maybe never in their current form. They're going to not let out the underlying stuff, about Event 201 planning it all, and Klaus Schwab and the microchipping and they're not going to paint a complete picture for people, and they're not. Even if they did do that, it would only be in one article one day. They wouldn't run, say, a series on that over a whole week or something. They would just do one fairly short article on that.
I mean, I've known from day one that this whole thing has been a scam. I've seen enough of these false flag terror events. This one bears all the hallmarks, all the methods, all the tactics, all the MO that's been used in all these previous psy-ops. This is the mother of all false flags. And this time, instead of playing terrorists in ski masks, running around with knives shouting Allahu Akbar, the crisis actors have been playing the role of dancing doctors and nurses, doing TikTok dance routines and stuff. When you've seen a few of these events, you can spot a new one in an instant. In fact, I doubt that there's been any real news, events that aren't set up or fabricated in some way, that have just happened organically, randomly, nobody could have foreseen seen them for many, many years. And maybe it's always been this way since the invention of mainstream media.
I tend to agree, Mark, actually, and I think what can happen is when an event kicks off, the first maybe day, 24 hours, you can get some truthful stories and some coverage before they've had a chance to get all the operatives in and get all the narratives in that they want in. So I think within the first 24 hours, you can get bits and pieces of truthful information in the mainstream, but then they tend to massage it all and perception manage it all. And so any questions that are initially raised tend to fade away. And I think what is interesting though is about the idea that they have had to seemingly fake stuff more and more, and it's like they can't get away with real events. Like, for example, what happened on 9/11. They really did destroy those towers. They really did disappear, etc. But whereas if you go to the Manchester event, for example, there's, from what Richard D. Hall has researched, is that there was no explosive device, or there certainly wasn't a suicide bomb. It looked like there might have been a big firework in a rucksack that was set off, and that was the extent of it. And the same could be said of the Boston Marathon. That was another apparently big firework. It wasn't a real bomb. So it's like they actually had to fake that whole event, not just the cover up of it. They had to fake the event as well.
Yeah. And
that seems to have been a trend. So, and we could argue, for example, that this virus itself is a complete fake. That there isn't a real virus. It's just an ordinary seasonal illness that's been going around, and they just faked the rest of it. But using a lot more people, a lot more, crisis actor scientists, I suppose you might call them.
Yeah.
So I think you could certainly make that argument, and maybe that does again imply that this thing, the whole scheme that they're trying to use, is indeed on its last legs, and they really have run out of road really to keep these deceptions going. Yeah. And it's perhaps because you and I are able to have conversations like this, and they've given us this fantastic communications technology which they wanted to use to enslave us, but we've at the same time been able to use it, at least in our own lives, to liberate ourselves spiritually.
That's right.
So again, there is that whole angle on that, and of course everyone's got this technology now. They're relying on everyone having this technology so that they can be tracked and so that they can be enslaved. But if people make a decision and start to become curious, they hold in their hands, literally almost, the power of their own enslavement or their own liberation themselves. I think that's maybe a point we could emphasise.
Well, there's some poetic justice in there somewhere, because I've made the point at many speeches and on many radio shows recently that we live in a satanically inverted society where everything that's good and pure and natural and inherent to creation gets taken and twisted and turned on its head and bastardized, so it ends up the direct opposite of what it was, with opposing values. And when it comes to the internet, there's no doubt that technology was intended primarily to surveil and control us and gather data and keep tabs on us. But I think it's beautiful the way the people have been able to turn that around for themselves and use it to share empowering, inspiring, liberating information. I think the creators of it underestimated the degree to which we would take that tool and use it for our own means. And I feel that it's contributed in a very big way towards their potential downfall. The cat is out of the bag. It's not going back in anytime soon. And we've been able to take that power upon ourselves by sharing information that just would not have been able to get out there to so many people without them gifting that technology to us. So it's going to backfire on them spectacularly, which is a fantastic thing.
Yeah, and I think trying to be a bit more hopeful about things. Again, a lot of people have been talking about the censorship, and I think you got a video strike. You saying you got a strike, didn't you, a couple of days ago?
I'm on my last legs on YouTube now. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we can talk about that a little bit, because again, I use Facebook quite a lot. Both to communicate with my family And for a lot of this stuff, I haven't experienced any censorship. Now, I don't have a particularly large audience, and maybe it's just that, I don't have a massive reach. I've only, I think, had one of my YouTube videos deleted, and that was back at the start of this, and it wasn't even a video that I made, it was another Skype interview that I did with somebody else that I reposted. So, whilst there has been censorship, and some of it has been quite severe, it's not been universal. We haven't had, I know there was a big YouTube channel called a couple of days ago, it's amazing, Polish channel got pulled, didn't it? And
there was the long knives, loads of channels got taken down.
Yeah. So we can't deny that that's happened, but nevertheless it's not been, at least not yet, not everyone has been taken down. We're still able to freely communicate on Facebook, or I haven't had any restrictions placed on there yet. So
yeah, I've never had a Facebook ban.
Sorry?
I've never had a Facebook ban.
Right, so does that give us some hope? Does that mean that we are, there is this route through this, and that there are positive energies or powers, or whatever you want to call them, encouraging us to carry on with this and enabling us to communicate? And I hope, obviously, that window of opportunity stays open. But I think a good policy is that people, do download stuff. And I, for example, I've been making DVDs for years. I started making DVDs back in about 2005 or 2006, and I must have, I sell them on my website at cost price, and I must have done close to 100,000 DVDs now over the years. I certainly tossed it once, and it came to nearly 50,000. And that's over a number of years, So that's a good way of preserving the information offline, because DVDs, can be made very cheaply. You can, if you buy them in bulk, you can make them for like sort of 15 pence each, something like that. And that's a good way. You can have it completely offline. You can get a cheap DVD player for probably a second-hand one very cheaply, or one of these TVs that has a built-in DVD player quite cheaply. And you don't need a web connection, So if the net does get more restricted, or more and more parts of it get shut down, as some have said, then there are other ways and means to communicate using technology which is not internet-based. So I think that's worth bearing in mind from an information point of view, let alone all the other types of prepping you might do. So I've certainly, I made a DVD of that Scamdemic video that came out a few weeks ago, the very, very good one, the 1 and 2. If people want DVDs, they can get them from my website. I've made a DVD and it's 5 hours long, and it's got a lot of this stuff on it. So that's a good way of sort of trying to counter the censorship if anybody is interested in that. And I think I recommend that you take steps to do that if you feel that you're competent to do that.
Sure.
Anybody that wants to know how to do that, I can let them know.
Well, I've just completed the process of downloading my entire archive of videos off my YouTube channel, saving them to a hard disk so that if my channel should disappear, I've got all those videos safe, and I've uploaded them to other platforms already. But even if the web goes down, those videos are then safe, and I recommend that everyone does that with all their material. Just keep hard copies of it offline in case the worst happens. But I'm really glad you brought up there the idea of benevolent forces that may be trying to assist humanity in this, because it really does feel as if these times are biblical. There's a spiritual battle going on here. It is literally good versus evil. Who can't feel this starting to play out now every day? And I'm just encouraged by the fact that liars always get tripped up by their own lies, and truth always rises to the surface in the end. Sometimes it takes a very long time to get there, decades, centuries even. We've got people now poring over events in history and applying new scrutiny to them and piecing together the way in which things may have happened, in contrast to the official story that's persisted for all this time. And now that we have this technology of the internet, and we have so many people communicating with each other daily and exchanging information, it doesn't take anywhere near as long as it used to for truth to come out. And it will. With this situation, the perpetrators of it will stand fully exposed for what they've done, and the truth will come out, and people will be forced to face up to it. that is a process that is inevitable. It's indicative of these times, and good and truth will always come through in the end.
I'll go back a few steps in our conversation in that I did this report about the fraud and whatnot, and I mentioned the crimes. And then we've talked about communication and stuff. So what I actually ended up doing, and you can see this on my website, the CV Pandemic Investigation one, I sent that report to about 40 police chiefs, and I sent it to like Public Health England, no, not Public Health, I sent it to the CQC, which is the Care Quality Commission, and a couple of NHS whistleblower addresses and whatnot. I found a load of suitable addresses. And so that has gone to them. All that evidence, the links to the government documents, all of that we described, and a fair bit more. So what I want to tell people is that the police are now being shown evidence that this is all a gigantic fraud, and I've had acknowledgement from some of them, only a few, but those acknowledgements that I got are also on my website, right? So if you are being challenged over these COVID-19 rules, you must wear a mask, you must close your business for 2 weeks or whatever it is. If you want to, you can now challenge this and say, no, I'm not going to do this, and because what you're telling me is based on fraud, and that's illegal. It's illegal. You cannot make these laws and diktats based on a fraud. So just go away, and if you want me to do whatever it is, then I'm not going to do it. And if you want to try and take action against me, I'm going to take action against you for fraud, whether that's the council or some bloody COVID marshal or whatever it is. You can tell them that you're going to take action against them because they are an accessory to fraud. And the police now know this, at least some of them do, and so do a few local councils. And on that theme, I designed this report as an information weapon, and people can use it and send it to your local council. You read it first, of course, and I know there's one guy who's been doing this, who's been going around his district and giving it to councillors and all kinds of people. And I can print out copies as well, so if people want paper copies of this report, the fraud report, quite happy to send it to them for free. I'll just print a few copies out. I've been giving them out in the street to a few people in Nottingham and stuff. So use that information and let's try and be optimistic. I've come out with some pessimistic things, but let's, as Marxists, end on a note of optimism and try and use this to push back this tide of tyranny, or whatever you want to call it.
Absolutely. And are there any other aspects of your work that you'd like to divert people's attention to, or any other aspect of your activities that you just want to promote at this point?
Yeah, just as a CV Pandemic Investigation website, a lot of resources on there. There's some letters to MPs, so if people want to, I'm not saying that's going to work particularly well, but there's, write a letter to your school about the face masks. Somebody had done one of those. I put that on there. There's some leaflets. I've got about 5,000 leaflets here. People can get those off me, and I'll post them to them. I would have a couple of people asking me for sending a few hundred leaflets just by post. I get donations to my website, so I'm not strapped for cash. I'll just send these things out gratis. If people want to devote a bit of time to giving this stuff out, I'll send it to you, no problem.
All right, Andrew, thanks for coming on today, brother, and I look forward to meeting you again in happier and freer times.
This is just for fun.
I'm picking up vibrations. I'm picking up vibrations. I'm picking up vibrations.